Our story begins with 7 high school students, each possessing an extraordinary talent that allowed them to surpass everyone in their respective fields. Among them was Yaoi Ichijo, the strongest samurai in the world. Since childhood, she had devoted her life entirely to mastering the sword. She never entered a tournament without emerging victorious, and over time her name became renowned everywhere. Then there was Prince Akatsuki, the greatest magician in the world. His performances amazed audiences everywhere, not only because of his sleight of hand, but also due to his sharp intellect and his incredible ability to deceive the eyes of anyone watching him. Next came Kane Kanzaki, the world's greatest doctor. With exceptional medical skill, she was capable of curing diseases and performing complex surgeries that few others could attempt. Her reputation spread across many nations, and people often requested her by name. On the other hand, there was Ringo Ohoshi, the genius behind the world's most advanced technology. A brilliant inventor, she spent most of her time surrounded by machines and wires, and hardly a day passed without her creating something far ahead of its time. After that was Masato Sanada, a highly influential and successful businessman. Despite his young age, he had already stepped into the world of economics and shifted the balance of major corporations through his bold strategies. Meanwhile, there was the journalist Shinobu Sarutobi, who possessed astonishing ninja abilities. These skills allowed him to infiltrate almost any place and gather information that would normally be impossible to obtain. Because of this, he was always the one responsible for news that shook the entire world. Finally, there was Tsukasa Mikogami, the strongest politician in the world, a young man with overwhelming charisma. Anyone who listened to him naturally found themselves convinced by his words. He had the ability to move the masses and influence critical decisions that could shape the future. All 7 of them possessed talents of immeasurable value. Because of these extraordinary abilities, they were constantly pursued by other nations that believed their power could alter the balance of the entire world. Despite this, they were all still Japanese high school students. Because of that, they became known in the media as the 7 Super High School Prodigies, a title that spread everywhere as people eagerly followed every piece of news about them. But one day, something strange and unexpected happened. While the 7 of them were aboard an airplane, violent tremors suddenly shook the aircraft. At first, they assumed it was nothing more than ordinary turbulence. However, the shaking suddenly intensified. The lights began flickering on and off, and the sound of the engines grew strange and unsettling. The plane veered off its course. Each of them tried to remain calm in their own way, but what was happening felt far beyond anything normal. Elsewhere, 2 women, half human and half beast, saw a strange metal object flying through the sky before crashing deep inside the forest. The massive object released thick smoke as it fell, and the deafening impact shook the entire area. Fear overwhelmed them. They had no idea what terrifying thing had just fallen from the sky. During this time, Tsukasa Mikogami regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he found himself facing a girl of the elf race named Riruru. She was the one who had rescued him and his 6 companions after the plane crash, yet her eyes were filled with both curiosity and fear at the same time. At that moment, Tsukasa thanked Riruru for saving him and his 6 companions. Although he had eaten something, his strength had not yet returned. His body was exhausted and he could barely move. To help him recover faster, Riruru chewed the food before giving it to him. According to their customs, this method allowed the body to regain strength more quickly. However, just as Riruru was about to feed him again, another half-beast girl suddenly entered the room. Her name was Winona, and she appeared visibly worried. At that moment, Tsukasa noticed something unusual about both Winona and Riruru. They had animal-like ears and features unlike anything he had ever seen before. For the first time in his life, he also heard the names of villages and kingdoms he had never known. Winona praised Tsukasa's behavior. Despite his young age, she admired his maturity. His words and the way he carried himself were unlike anyone she had ever met. In return, Tsukasa was surprised to learn that Winona, who appeared quite young, actually had a grown child. Her appearance made her seem far younger than she truly was. But his confusion deepened when he discovered that neither Winona nor Riruru had ever heard of Japan. In fact, they knew nothing about it. Even stranger, the language they were speaking, although somewhat similar to Japanese, was not Japanese at all. They explained that it was called Alta, the primary language of this world. To confirm his suspicions, Tsukasa asked Riruru and Winona to take him to the place where he had been found 4 days earlier. The journey through the forest was long. Strange sounds echoed around them, and unfamiliar creatures moved among the trees. Tsukasa believed the chances of his companions surviving were extremely low. He expected to find nothing but the complete wreckage of the plane. But when he arrived and saw that his friends were still alive, standing among the scattered remains of the aircraft, he felt a deep sense of relief. However, his astonishment reached its peak when he saw a dragon flying across the sky before him, its enormous wings spreading through the air. At that moment, Tsukasa realized something undeniable. He was no longer on Earth. He had arrived in another world, a world where creatures he once believed to be mere legends truly existed. After that, a full month passed. Gradually, everyone regained consciousness and recovered from their injuries. To celebrate their survival, the villagers held a small welcoming feast. Though simple, it was filled with warm hospitality. During this time, Tsukasa explained everything he had learned to his companions. He described how they had been transported into a parallel world, sharing the observations he had gathered over the past month. Meanwhile, the village chief found it difficult to believe that people had truly come from another world. He continued asking them many questions, trying to confirm the truth. Among them all, Prince Akatsuki was the only one who still remained unconvinced. He suspected that what they were experiencing might simply be a grand illusion, or an elaborate trick. During the celebration, the villagers were amazed when Tsukasa added mayonnaise, something he had personally created, to the boiled potatoes they were eating. The food that the children had grown tired of suddenly became a delicious meal with a completely new taste. This small change alone made the villagers look at the group with admiration. With something so simple, they had managed to transform an ordinary part of daily life. Elsewhere, the journalist Shinobu began investigating the Byuma that Riruru had mentioned. He spoke with the elders of the village and searched through old books. He discovered that the Byuma were a race that was half human. They possessed extraordinary physical strength and relied on that power in their daily lives. Meanwhile, the Hyuma were a human race that possessed what was known as blessing, a mysterious power similar to magic that allowed them to use a strange form of energy in everyday life. When Tsukasa heard this, he decided to learn more about magic. He believed that understanding this power might be the key to their survival in this new world. Later, Winona remembered an ancient story. It spoke of 7 heroes who came from another world to save this world from an evil dragon that was destroying kingdoms. The story had been told to children for generations, but now, it sounded strangely similar to their own situation. This caught the attention of Tsukasa and the others. After all, they were 7 people. And there was also a story about 7 people who came from another world. So a question began to form in everyone's mind. Was their arrival in this world merely a coincidence? Or was there a greater reason behind it that had yet to be revealed? But while they were talking about that story, Elk, Winona's son, suddenly appeared, clearly irritated. He declared that the story was nothing more than a ridiculous tale that could not be believed, and that it made no sense for heroes to suddenly descend from the sky. He also objected to holding a celebration for strangers in a village that was already suffering from a lack of resources and constant hardship. However, his words stopped immediately when Winona raised her hand and gave him a warning look that made him fall silent at once. Before leaving, he spoke clearly, saying that it would be best for these strangers to leave the village as soon as they recovered their strength, because he believed their presence might bring trouble. After the celebration ended, the 7 gathered together to decide their next step. They began thinking practically, setting emotions aside. At that moment, Tsukasa proposed 3 essential tasks that they needed to work on. First, they had to search for any possible way to return to Earth, no matter how difficult it might seem. Second, they needed to gather information about the 7 heroes mentioned in the ancient legends. The third task was to study this new world, especially the kingdom of Freyard, to understand its laws, regions, rulers, how its army operated, and how ordinary people lived there. At the same time, Tsukasa believed they should repay the village that had saved their lives by trying to improve its situation, whether by developing agriculture, strengthening trade, or even reinforcing its defenses in case it faced another attack. The next day, an important development occurred. Ringo successfully repaired the phones of Tsukasa's friends and made them function in this world, after modifying the signal so it could adapt to the new environment. They also discovered metal materials near the wreckage of the airplane that could be used to produce aluminum, as some parts were still usable. Ringo explained that she would use those materials for an important project, especially since the small nuclear power source she possessed had survived the crash. She confirmed that she only needed 3 days to present the the result to Tsukasa, adding that she intended to build a device that would grant them technological superiority over any power in this world. However, things did not remain peaceful for long. A group of fake soldiers arrived at the village. They came to insult Winona and pressure the villagers. Although they wore armor that appeared official, their behavior made it clear that they were merely people exploiting the name of the army. When Tsukasa saw this, he could not stand by and do nothing. A fight soon broke out in front of the villagers, but those soldiers were no match for the abilities of Tsukasa, Shinobu, and Aoi, who moved swiftly and resolved the situation without causing significant destruction around them. They managed to drive the soldiers out of the village. However, Masato Sanada and Shinobu warned that even if those men were imposters, they were still soldiers and might report what had happened to their superiors, who could later return with reinforcements. Despite that, Tsukasa showed no concern. He had already prepared a plan with Prince Akatsuki to intimidate them. Akatsuki used clever visual tricks and illusions that made the soldiers believe a terrifying power was guarding the village. Terrified, they screamed and fled. The purpose of this was to prevent them from returning to their commanders and creating a larger problem for the villagers. Afterward, Tsukasa asked his 6 companions to work together to find a way to return to their original world, Earth. He understood that the power of the 7 of them, if used recklessly, could lead to the destruction of this world itself. Because of that, he believed they had to act wisely so that they would not become the cause of a greater catastrophe. Meanwhile, Masato and Elk went to the Merchants Guild to sell the village's products, such as medicinal herbs and handmade crafts. However, the deal offered to them was extremely unfair and clearly based on exploitation. As a result, Masato refused to sell there, declaring that he would not allow anyone to deceive them. Elk explained that the problem was that all trade was monopolized by a single merchant, and no one was able to compete with him. But Masato confidently declared that he would defeat that merchant within just 1 week and break this monopoly in his own way. In one corner, a small child was secretly listening to the conversation between Elk and Masato, paying close attention to every word. At that moment, Masato said that a life that simply flows with the current without trying to change anything holds no excitement, and that change always requires someone willing to start it. Those words deeply affected the child and made him feel that he had the chance to become something greater than his circumstances. Elk was surprised that Masato was also angered by the injustice the village had suffered, even though he was not one of its people. Because of this, Elk decided to trust him and stand by his side. Meanwhile, each of the 7 super high school prodigies began fulfilling their roles to help the village. Kaina started treating the sick for free, while Aoi trained the young villagers to defend themselves. Ringo worked on developing and improving tools, while Prince Akatsuki attracted people with his magical performances, which helped stimulate the village market. And so, the 7 used their unique abilities to serve the village, as a gesture of gratitude to the place that had saved their lives. Riruru hoped that Elk would eventually grow used to the rest of the group and stop treating them like strangers. During that time, worry began spreading among the villagers, as both salt and flour were running low with winter approaching. This made everyone fear a shortage of supplies. However, Tsukasa reassured Riruru, confirming that Masato Sanada and Shinobu, who had gone to the city, would be able to bring everything the village needed, and would return with good news. Speaking about the village's situation, Winona explained that things had become difficult recently, because a fat merchant named Joy had previously monopolized trade. He used to buy goods at very cheap prices and then sell them at high prices, exploiting the needs of the people. But Tsukasa showed no concern because he believed that this problem could be solved easily thanks to Masato, a merchant who knew how to manage business intelligently. For Masato, this was not merely trade, it was a great challenge that could allow him to establish a trading company belonging to Elm Village, granting it economic independence. Indeed, thanks to the information that Shinobu had gathered about the mayor of Dortmund, who was receiving large funding from an organization called New Chaland, Masato managed to use the information recorded in the mayor's secret documents as a clever form of pressure. Through this, he obtained an official permit to conduct trade. Thus, Masato's plan as a businessman began to take shape, and he decided to teach Elk how to earn money in a fair way without exploiting anyone. Meanwhile, the child who had previously been listening secretly appeared again and asked Masato to teach him as well how to achieve great wealth. He said that he did not want to depend on anyone in his life and wanted to become strong on his own. When Masato looked into the eyes of the child, whose name was Ryo. He saw determination and ambition greater than that of many people older than him. Because of that, he decided to teach him the basics of trade and how to think with the mindset of a successful merchant. Elk was surprised by the decision and asked whether it was really possible to involve a child of unknown origin in selling goods. But Masato agreed without hesitation and explained that origin was not as important as determination. Then he gave Ryo new clothes so that he would look better before starting work, and he taught him how to speak confidently in front of customers. After that, Masato invited the rest of the villagers to participate in trade through the new Elm Company, explaining the plan to them in detail. If they agreed to sell their products through the company, Masato would take only 10% from each sale in exchange for organization, marketing, and transportation. This offer was extremely attractive compared to what they had previously received from New Zealand Company, which had been taking large profits while leaving them with very little. Because of that, everyone agreed. They even decided to invite the people of neighboring villages to participate in Elm Company, which had already obtained an official trading permit from the mayor. Masato then announced that the store would soon open in the center of the city. Although Elk still felt some worry and kept thinking about the possibility of failure, Masato reassured him confidently, explaining that every business always begins with a bold step and that constant fear prevents people from moving forward. The confidence in his voice made Elk feel reassured, as if there was a real plan moving towards success. The next day, Elk and Ryo were surprised by the number of merchants who arrived at the center of the city carrying large quantities of goods. The place quickly filled with boxes and various products coming from different villages. In this way, they no longer needed to make a great effort to collect goods themselves, and at the same time, they would receive 10% from every transaction, a large profit, especially since they were not responsible for production costs. People began to see this new market as a different opportunity, far from the monopoly they had grown used to. The most important thing that Masato focused on during that stage was trust. Trust between him and the merchants, between the merchants and the customers, and even between him and the villagers. He believed that money could be recovered, but if one's reputation was lost, it would be difficult to restore. Thanks to that, they were able to make use of the trading permit that had once been monopolized, and they were now making greater profits with lower costs. Masato believed that Elm Company could become a powerful competitor, perhaps even stronger than New Zealand Company itself, because it relied on genuine relationships rather than mere influence. It did not take long before customers began to gather when they learned that there were merchants other than New Zealand Company. The prices were cheaper, the location was close to the center of the city, and the treatment was better. The news spread quickly and the number of customers increased day after day. Ryo was amazed by the large crowd and kept looking around with admiration. After they sold all the goods and made large profits, Shinobu contacted Masato and informed him about important information regarding the movements of their competitors. At that moment, Masato asked him to send the village's supplies as well as Ringo's laboratory requirements from the profits of that deal without delay. In this way, Ringo's laboratory supplies were secured, and the villagers felt great happiness because the stock that Masato and Elk had brought back was greater than usual. They even managed to obtain sugar and spices that had once been rare for them. For the first time, everyone felt that the coming winter would not be as harsh as in previous years. Masato expected that within 3 more days he would be able to deliver a severe economic blow to New Zealand Company and strip away its influence. When Tsukasa heard this, he simply trusted in Masato's abilities, because he knew well his skill in planning and managing crises. On the other side, the merchant Joy was underestimating Elm Company, which had begun growing rapidly. He believed that it was nothing more than a temporary wave that would soon disappear, but he did not expect what happened next. When the new product, mayonnaise, appeared, people began to gather around to try it, and the entire supply was quickly sold out. When Ryo appeared tasting it in front of everyone with a smile and confidence, the customers' interest grew even more. At that moment, a man named Klaus appeared. He was the commander of the Sarbin naval fleet, and the mayonnaise caught his attention as well, since he saw it as a promising business opportunity. It was as if Masato had been waiting for this meeting. He welcomed him warmly and began speaking with him about a long-term partnership. It seemed that Masato had already gathered information about him beforehand through Shinobu. In the end, the two sides held a meeting in which they discussed the details of the business, the agreements between them, and the transportation of goods by sea. Day after day, Elm Company continued to grow rapidly, and its sales kept rising without pause. As for Joy, who had underestimated the matter at first, he began to realize that the situation was no longer simple, especially after Sarbon Company started shifting its dealings toward Elm instead of his own new Shaland Company. But instead of learning from his mistake, Joy decided to open a new store to compete with Elm Company as it was expanding, acting with excessive confidence and arrogance without changing his old methods. Meanwhile, Rue was amazed by the large amount of money they had managed to earn, and she began to understand the value of the work they had done. During that time, Shinobu obtained information indicating that New Chaland would soon begin making its move, which made Elk feel some concern about the expected reaction. However, with the progress they had achieved so far, things were not easy for their rivals. Even if their opponents decided to confront them, they would not be able to do so easily because the network that Masato had organized trusted him completely and was ready to protect their shared interests. Elsewhere, Ringo finished working on the aluminum that the village needed and began using it to improve agricultural tools and equipment. Because of that, Tsukasa became confident that work in the village would become more efficient and that the villagers would be very happy when they saw the difference themselves. However, because Ringo had been working continuously without almost any rest, Tsukasa asked her to take a break and not push herself too hard, reminding her that their health was more important than any project. After that, snow began to fall. Tsukasa noticed that the villagers were struggling to obtain water, especially with winter arriving and nearby sources beginning to freeze. At that moment, he started thinking about a solution to this problem, such as creating a system for drawing water or storing reserves before the cold became harsher. On the other side, Jako ordered his followers to purchase all the goods available from Elm Company, attempting to restore his monopoly over trade and break the system the company had established. But Joy was surprised to discover that his followers were unable to buy goods from Elm Company, even though money was not an issue for them. The company had already begun relying on an organized distribution network and refused to sell large quantities to a single buyer. Because of this, Joy personally went to the market to see what was happening. There he was shocked to find that the merchants who had always worked with him had switched to Elm Company, led by Masato, because they saw security and fair profit in dealing with it. As a result, he was no longer able to obtain goods, nor could he pressure them as he had done in the past. In this way, Jako became economically cornered, as the people's trust in him had completely disappeared. Thus, the trade war ended in Masato's favor within just 1 week, exactly as he had predicted earlier, thanks to the system of trust that people preferred in their business dealings. Yet the surprising thing was that Masato did not want to destroy New Zealand Company completely. He had no desire to monopolize the market or become the sole controller of trade. His vision went further than that. He wanted to make use of Joy and his company to expand his own business even more, without carrying all the burdens alone. From his point of view, if Joy's company disappeared suddenly, a large gap would appear in the distribution and supply system, and Masato would not be able to manage all trade by himself, no matter how skilled he was. Therefore, instead of destroying his rival, he decided to use him within his plan, as a small piece within a larger system that would serve the interests of Elm Company without him even realizing it. At first, Elk felt confused and could not understand how someone could defeat his rival and still allow him to continue. But after listening to Masato's clear words, in which he explained that business sometimes required harsh decisions to win, Elk accepted his decision. Masato even said proudly that people in his previous world used to call him the Demon King Merchant, because he always knew how to turn the tables on his opponents without appearing to do anything at all. After that, a group of people appeared demanding that Rue be returned to them. It was revealed that Rue had once been a slave before she started working with them. Those people considered her their property and wanted to take her back by force. However, Masato did not intervene immediately to save her. First, he wanted to see her own will. Would she choose freedom and accept the difficult path, or would she surrender to what others forced upon her? In the end, Rue asked Masato to buy her. She wanted to earn a great deal of money and become wealthy, and she wanted to prove herself to her family, who had also become slaves. She wanted to change their fate. When Masato heard her words and saw the determination in her eyes, he immediately bought her at a very high price without any negotiation, as if declaring to everyone that Rue had now become part of his company and that no one had the right to claim her anymore. This moment changed the way many people saw him. Despite his harshness in business and his bold decisions, a different side of him appeared when he saw true ambition before him. But after that, things took a more dangerous turn. The matter had now become a real war. Tsukasa proposed a difficult option, sacrificing Prit in order to protect the rest of the people, a practical solution that would preserve the safety of the majority. However, Elk rejected this proposal immediately, declaring that they would no longer be themselves if they allowed one person to sacrifice herself alone. Winona also declared that the villagers could not abandon Prit to her fate, no matter the cost. It was true that they were only ordinary villagers and weak before the kingdom's army, but they would not be able to live with a clear conscience if they left Prit to suffer harm. Although Tsukasa's words sounded harsh when he spoke about sacrificing her, he was in fact worried about her as well and was trying to find a solution that would minimize losses as much as possible. At that moment, Winona declared that she wanted to save Prit and asked for the help of Tsukasa and his group. She knew that they possessed the power and intelligence capable of changing the balance of the situation. However, Tsukasa warned everyone that what awaited them would not be easy. If they chose to fight, they would be entering a difficult battle in which much blood could be shed and great losses might occur. Even so, he said that if the villagers possessed a true will to fight, then, as a democratic prime minister, he would not abandon them. Instead, he would stand beside them and help them until they achieved victory and fulfilled their desire to rebel against injustice. He also warned them that his own group would be fighting this time as well, and that their lives would be at stake. Therefore, they had to be serious with every step they took. He added that the results of what they were about to do could be so great that they might change the civilization of this world for the next 500 years in many different fields. But on the other hand, if they chose the wrong path, it could lead to the destruction of the entire world. Prit was prepared to meet Marquise Findolf. On the surface, her expression showed submission, yet inside she was trying to prove her strength. When the ruler saw her, he felt pleased to have such a beautiful woman before him and treated her as nothing more than a prize. The other reason Prit appeared submissive and did not resist was that the knight captain had promised her that the village would not be harmed again if she did not rebel and obeyed their orders. For that reason, she accepted the offer in order to protect the villagers, so when the ruler approached her, she was forced to surrender for the sake of the village and her family. But the moment the ruler tried to get closer to her, a sudden disturbance in magic occurred, and everyone disappeared from their place in a single instant in a way no one expected. At that moment, Findolf was consumed by anger and ordered Captain Inzaghi to restrain Prit so that he could punish her and ensure she would not lose control again. On the other side, the forces of the villagers led by Tsukasa had prepared to attack Pendov Castle according to a precise plan. Ringo and Kamusa prepared the assault on the fortress using primitive rockets that Tsukasa had approved in order to open the path for the attackers and break the gate. The ruler and the captain were shocked by the explosion and its power, because they had never seen a weapon like that before. As soon as the path was opened, the village forces rushed forward to attack. Although they were met with a rain of arrows from the walls above, the strong lightweight shields created by Ringo protected them and allowed them to advance steadily. This surprised Captain Inzaghi because he believed that iron armor was heavy and prevented fast movement. But those shields were made from a modern material known as duralumin, a material that was both light and strong and widely used in the modern era. Meanwhile, Elk began shooting arrows from a long distance with remarkable precision, using advanced arrows designed by Ringo specifically to pierce armor. At the same time, Yaoi, Winona, and Rue demonstrated their strength against large numbers of enemies, each in her own way, and the balance of the battle gradually began to tilt in favor of the villagers. Inside the castle, Tsukasa managed to infiltrate the interior thanks to the information that Shinobu had gathered about the secret passages and the security system. However, while moving through the dark corridors, he encountered Gil Stafford, the Imperial Mage. At that moment, Captain Inzaghi ordered his forces to gather for an attack because he saw that the number of attackers did not exceed dozens of fighters, while the kingdom had hundreds of soldiers. He believed victory was guaranteed through numbers. The soldiers began moving in organized formations to surround the village forces from every direction. This situation made Masato feel some pressure because Inzaghi appeared to be an intelligent commander who knew how to manage a battle, not merely a reckless knight. But the situation changed quickly when Prince Akatsuki appeared before everyone as a magician. He used a massive smoke bomb that covered the entire battlefield. Although he announced that the smoke was poisonous to frighten the soldiers, his true goal was to scatter the forces and prevent them from taking advantage of their numerical superiority. Amid the chaos, Akatsuki managed to overcome his fear of death and carried out his plan successfully, giving the village forces a chance to move. After that, Captain Inzaghi noticed that the castle's mage was no longer present, and he began to suspect that there were infiltrators inside the castle. Without wasting time, he rushed inside. But it was already too late. Shinobu had managed to defeat the mage with a sudden electric attack that disrupted his spells and knocked him down before he could complete his magic. At that moment, Tsukasa was told to continue advancing, while Shinobu confronted Inzaghi, who had suddenly entered. He had to choose between facing him directly or continuing toward his primary objective. When they entered the ruler's chamber, Tsukasa felt shock and relief at the same time when he saw that Prit had survived the greatest danger and was still safe. But suddenly, Tsukasa received a powerful blow to his chest. Findolf rejoiced at this, believing that Tsukasa had died and that the rebellion had ended. The strike was powerful and knocked Tsukasa to the ground for a moment. When the ruler attempted to seize Prit and declare his victory, Tsukasa threw a knife with precision toward Findolf. The ruler was shocked because he had believed Tsukasa was dead, but it turned out that Tsukasa had been wearing an advanced bulletproof suit designed by Ringo, lightweight yet capable of absorbing the impact. After sensing the danger, Findolf offered money and Prit's freedom in exchange for their withdrawal, but Tsukasa refused because he knew that even if they retreated now, the Empire would continue to hunt them and consider them a threat. Tsukasa also declared that he intended to establish a republican revolution where people would be equal and power would not be inherited. Leadership would instead be chosen by the will of the people. But Findolf mocked these words and declared them impossible in a world built upon nobles and power. Although the emperor was known for his cruelty and had warned them that death awaited those who rebelled, Tsukasa declared that they would attack the emperor first before he could attack them or eliminate them. In the end, Tsukasa fired a rubber bullet that struck Findolf's head, causing him to lose consciousness without killing him. Thus, Prit was finally rescued. But in that moment, the expression in her eyes suddenly changed, and a strange voice emerged through her, saying that the world had been exhausted by a great evil dragon and that destruction was approaching. That voice also revealed that Tsukasa and his companions were 7 chosen heroes from another world, brought to this world in order to change its fate. Before the events continued, Prit regained consciousness and burst into tears from overwhelming joy after gaining her freedom. Even so, there remained a trace of sadness in her heart, because she knew that the villagers of Elm and Tsukasa would become targets of the Empire, which now viewed them as rebels and a threat to its rule. However, the truth was that the attack had succeeded. The people of Elm had achieved victory thanks to the 7 heroes and their carefully prepared plan. After this victory, the residents of Findolf's domain were greatly shocked. It was not only because they saw advanced wagons moving through the streets, machines unlike anything they had ever seen before, but also because of the appearance of Prince Akatsuki, who declared himself a ruler possessing magical power and the symbol of a new era. The people were also given mayonnaise as gifts for free in order to strengthen their trust in the new system. Prit herself was used in the promotion as well, so that the people would feel reassured. The reason Tsukasa created this religion was his belief that religion could quickly unite people and deliver the idea of justice directly to their hearts. For that reason, he chose the name the 7 Luminaries' Faith for this religion, hoping that if the native people who were waiting for the heroes learned of this name, they might eventually make contact with him. Tsukasa also intended for the management of life to be placed in the hands of society itself, so that people could become more independent. If the 7 heroes were ever to return to Earth one day, this world would still be able to stand on its own. Meanwhile, Prit and Winona began producing mayonnaise using a hand mixer to speed up the preparation and distribute larger quantities. Even so, Prit felt uneasy because she had not thanked Tsukasa directly for saving her, and she kept thinking about the proper way to express her gratitude. On the other hand, Elk and Shinobu decided to search for information in the city of Buchwald, located beyond the Ruru Mountains, even though heavy snow was falling and the road was filled with danger. At the same time, the teachings of the 7 Luminaries' Faith began spreading day after day. They distributed mayonnaise and performed simple demonstrations to help people trust them more and understand their idea of equality. One night, while the mayor of Dortmund, a man named Walter von Heitzerold, was preparing to flee the city before he could be held accountable, he was suddenly surprised when Tsukasa entered his office in disguise. Tsukasa offered him cooperation because he wanted to make use of his experience. He also gave him a clear warning. If he refused the offer, he would disappear from the empire and from the protection of the seven luminaries' faith, leaving him with no one to defend him. Tsukasa explained that there were many tasks suitable for someone with rank and experience, and that in return for his loyalty, he would receive a respectable salary. The next day, Mayor Heiserold announced to the people that he would hand over the authority of the city to the seven luminaries' faith to ensure stability. This decision greatly pleased the citizens because they saw real change happening before their eyes. Soon, the symbol of the religion was placed throughout the streets and public squares. That night, the seven heroes, except for Shinobu, gathered together and talked about Tsukasa, who had begun wearing a rather cute disguise as part of his new image. This made Ringo feel a little embarrassed while laughing at the same time. Tsukasa also decided to allow his companions some rest and let them return to Elm Village to check on it, because Windorf would now begin strengthening its influence and stabilizing its rule. However, Kanei asked Tsukasa to allocate a budget and a team to secure medical supplies and antibiotics that were beginning to run out. Tsukasa agreed immediately and asked her to sit with him and write a detailed list of all the necessities, large or small, so that nothing would be forgotten. Kanei began organizing the ideas and setting priorities, while Tsukasa asked about every point to ensure that everything would be implemented accurately. After that, he looked at Ringo and asked her to prepare a small electrical power source in the area, just enough to run the essential equipment without attracting attention. As for the materials required for the project, Masato would provide them, since he was always able to obtain what they needed at the right time and with the least loss. Yaoi was also given a clear mission: to remain at Akatsuki's side at all times to protect him in case any sudden danger appeared. As for Akatsuki, whose appearance resembled that of a girl despite being a young man, he often felt embarrassed by the looks and comments of people. Many assumed he lacked masculinity, which sometimes placed him in awkward situations despite his attempts to ignore it. At this stage, Tsukasa believed the time had come to unify the strength of the soldiers belonging to the seven luminaries' faith, turning them into an organized force working toward one goal, instead of having each group act separately. At that moment, Masato raised a logical question. Who would be the commander capable of leading such a large number of soldiers? The forces were numerous, and controlling them would not be easy. They needed someone capable of gathering people under a single purpose. Tsukasa had already chosen the person suitable for this leadership, a man who possessed experience, calm judgment, and the ability to make decisions in the most difficult moments. But the problem was that this very man had already decided to abandon the life of a soldier entirely. But Tsukasa was not ready to give up easily. He wanted to try convincing him to return once again. His real name was Zest Bernard, but after leaving the army, he became known as Jace Bernard. His departure from the army had not been a simple matter. He had realized that this region would soon become a battlefield because of the movements of the seven luminaries' faith, and he did not want to remain part of a conflict he could clearly see approaching. In addition, Tsukasa's ideas about transforming the country into a democratic system made Jace reconsider his life. He wanted to search for work that he truly loved, something that would give his life meaning. He believed that there was something important he needed to accomplish, and he did not see war as the path to achieve it. For that reason, Jace refused Tsukasa's offer to return to the army without hesitation. Although the refusal was clear and direct, Tsukasa felt that this man could be relied upon even more, because someone who rejects power so easily is not a person chasing empty glory. When they arrived at Jace's home, they found him standing outside chopping wood with his own hands, living a simple life far from noise and conflict. Tsukasa immediately went straight to the point and told him that his main goal was to make him the commander of the knights. He needed someone capable of leading the army, making decisions with a calm mind, and carrying responsibility for the soldiers under his command. In his eyes, Jace possessed all of those qualities, but Jace replied that he had heard these words since yesterday, and that his position had not changed. He had already left the life of a knight and started a new chapter. At that moment, a small and gentle girl named Aerie appeared. She stood at a distance watching them, while holding onto her father's clothes. Aerie was Jace's daughter. It turned out that Jace had lost his wife to a sudden epidemic that had taken the lives of many people. Since that tragedy, he had decided to dedicate his entire life to Aerie. Leaving the knights had been his decision so he could remain beside her, because he was no longer willing to leave her behind, or risk his life in war again. But Tsukasa's response was stronger than Jace had expected. He said that he did not want blind loyalty like the loyalty demanded by the empire, where ranks and social classes mattered more than the suffering of ordinary people. He explained that he was not searching for a soldier who simply obeyed orders. He wanted a partner in struggle, someone who would stand beside him to build a democratic kingdom where everyone could live freely without fear. His words were not about glory or authority, they were about a different future. But for that future to exist, the entire way people thought would have to change. A revolution of minds would have to happen before a revolution on the land itself. At that moment, Jace asked the question that had been on his mind. Could a world truly exist where every person had the freedom to choose their own future? Tsukasa answered with confidence that such a world was possible, but only if he and the people themselves decided to participate and help, instead of standing aside as spectators. He also explained that knights do not fight simply to obey orders. They fight for something they love and wish to protect. For a bright future for all people, not just for a single class. After hearing those words, Jace Bernard looked at his daughter Aerie, who was growing up before his eyes day after day. At that moment, he realized that the decision he made now would shape her entire life. He did not want to see her live under the oppression of the empire or grow up in a world filled with fear. After a long moment of thought, Jace finally decided to accept the offer and return to the front lines. However, not everyone was pleased with what was happening. Some former nobles were filled with anger towards Tsukasa and his companions because their positions had been taken from them, and the influence they once enjoyed was beginning to disappear. That anger continued to grow inside them, meaning that the problems were far from over. Elsewhere, Shinobu and Lehigh were reviewing their combat techniques and skills as they prepared to gather information about the army of one of the empire's nobles. That man was called Oslo El Gustave, who carried the title of Duke. His name alone was enough to make people treat him with caution. Gustav was famous for his overwhelming magical power. He was capable of burning an entire area in a very short time, as if the flames themselves obeyed his command. In addition to that, he was fiercely loyal to the emperor and willing to do anything to preserve the existing order. All that Elk knew was that the imperial army would move toward Findolf after winter ended. But Shinobu had managed to gather more information about Gustav and his movements, even though he still did not know the true extent of the Duke's power. Even so, Shinobu intended to meet Duke Gustav himself in order to obtain more precise information. It was an extremely bold step, one that left Elk astonished, because to him it looked like a very dangerous risk. At the same time, Captain Inzaghi managed to escape and eventually reach the residence of Oslo El Gustave. However, his end came quickly. He was judged negligent because he had fled the battlefield, which in their eyes was an unforgivable crime. As a result, he was punished immediately. When Gustav learned about the existence of the rebels, his anger ignited and he began thinking about how he would deal with them before their influence grew further. Meanwhile, Tsukasa was dealing with the nobles, or rather making use of their influence to a certain extent, in order to organize the region and improve it for the sake of ordinary people. He understood that politics required balance, and that not every step should be a direct confrontation. During that time, rumors began spreading that the angels of the seven luminaries' faith never rested and were always active and prepared. Even so, Tsukasa said that even if they never stopped working, he still needed to take a moment to review his calculations and organize his thoughts. After finishing his main duties, the construction of Elm Village began progressing steadily, and people started to feel that real change was happening before their eyes. As for the village chief, who had been suffering from illness for a long time, he recovered thanks to the treatment of Dr. Kaini and was able to stand on his feet again. However, the instructions were clear. He had to continue resting and avoid exhausting himself because any additional strain could worsen his condition again. If that happened, Kini would be forced to put him into another induced sleep to protect his health after all the effort spent treating him. After that, everyone was surprised by Rue's condition, as she seemed close to collapsing. She had been trying to memorize the multiplication table that Masato had given her so she could become a skilled merchant. But Winona and the chief of Olga Village gave her helpful advice, and Kaini encouraged her to return to studying seriously. During that period, Ringo succeeded in building a power station using the coal that was abundant in this world. After solving the electricity problem, she began thinking about her next project, manufacturing different types of machines for the villagers so that they could prepare firearms for the upcoming battle. Tsukasa also asked Ringo to construct anti-air defenses because he had heard from Shinobu a rumor about a man named Gustav who was capable of launching a long-range aerial attack capable of destroying an entire city in an instant using what was known as Heaven's Fire. At the same time, Tsukasa did not want the villagers to depend on him and his companions more than necessary. Instead, he wanted them to become capable of relying on themselves. If the 7 of them ever returned to Earth one day, everything they had done, the work and the revolution, would lose its meaning if the people of this world did not become stronger and capable of standing on their own. Masato understood this very well too. He knew that this world was filled with magic and dangerous flying creatures, so he understood Tsukasa's thinking. The possibility of being attacked with Heaven's Fire was extremely high. During that time, Prit ran toward Tsukasa and invited him to have lunch with her. She simply wanted to thank him for saving her, but Tsukasa apologized and explained that he had to attend another meeting and could not come. Prit felt a little sad, as she began to think that Tsukasa had started distancing himself from her recently. She even feared that he might hate her because of what she believed were flaws within herself. However, Masato explained the truth to her. He told her that Tsukasa felt embarrassed because earlier he had been prepared to sacrifice Prit as a choice to protect the villagers. In the end, everyone had chosen to fight, and Prit had been saved. Because of that, Tsukasa might now be avoiding sitting close to her because of his guilt, and that was simply part of his nature. Masato added that this was one of Tsukasa's flaws. He always placed the safety of others before himself, to the point that he might even sacrifice those he cared about. In Masato's eyes, that way of thinking was not entirely logical. At the same time, Tsukasa praised the nobles who had worked hard in building the city and asked them to take a day of rest so they could recover their strength. Tsukasa himself was exhausted from constant work. When Prit came to him again, he initially refused her request because he wanted to rest, but Prit decided to enter anyway because she wanted to thank him for saving her. She was even ready to do anything to express her gratitude. Truly, anything. In truth, Prit was not upset by the fact that Tsukasa had once been ready to sacrifice her because she had been thinking the same way. Even so, Tsukasa and his companions had chosen to fight in the end and rescue her. Prit knew very well that Tsukasa was a very kind person. At that moment, Tsukasa remembered a small part of his past. He once had a father who was a great politician whom he had admired, but Tsukasa explained that he himself had caused his father's downfall after discovering that the power he had built was founded on massive corruption. With the help of Shinobu and Masato, Tsukasa exposed his father's crimes before the public. As a result, he was arrested and eventually sentenced to execution. Tsukasa also spoke about his hatred toward his mother because she had been responsible for destroying the lives of people he loved and for ruining his family. Even so, his focus had always remained on the interests of the people. He felt no regret and never forgave his father. When Prit heard this story, she could not hold back her tears, but Tsukasa told her that everything that had happened was part of the path he had chosen for himself as a politician. At that moment, Prit tried to comfort him. She felt that he believed many people hated him, but she assured him that she would never hate him because she saw him as a kind person. After that, Tsukasa relaxed slightly within the conversation. Tsukasa felt some comfort and thanked Prit, who had cried for his sake. But this close moment between them was witnessed by someone else. Ringo had been watching silently, and it was clear that Ringo had feelings for Tsukasa, which was why she felt troubled when she saw that scene. At the same time, Elk and Shinobu were enjoying the delicious food prepared by the residents of Kokono village at a guest house managed by Emerald and her daughter Melinda. The villagers were friendly and laughed often in front of Elk and Shinobu, which made Elk feel that the village under the rule of Duke Oslo El Gustave seemed very prosperous. After they drank a great deal, Elk and Shinobu were taken to rest. At that moment, Melinda tried to warn Elk and asked him to leave the village, but her mother, Emerald, stopped her before she could finish speaking. Elk did not fully understand the reason, yet he felt comfortable and happy to be there. But the surprise came immediately afterward. She had only done it to wake him from the effects of the alcohol. Shinobu noticed that something strange was happening in the village. The residents were not eating the food placed before them, even though their faces clearly showed hunger and malnutrition. She then pulled Elk aside and revealed the truth to him. Elk was deeply shocked, so much that he felt nauseous when he discovered that tourists who visited the village were being killed and then eaten by the starving villagers. However, Shinobu reassured him that the meat they had eaten was animal meat. The villagers would deliberately make their visitors drink heavily so that they could later exploit them as food. Suddenly, the sound of the imperial army was heard ordering the villagers to gather. The inspection was led by the Silver Knights, under the command of the Knight Jean de LeBlanc. As for the ordinary villagers, their lives seemed carefully arranged so that they would always appear happy and satisfied. However, the knights noticed that Melinda was wearing slightly dirty clothes. Under the excuse of preserving the cleanliness desired by the emperor, the girl was brutally whipped. Even worse, her mother Emerald remained smiling as she watched her daughter being tortured, because the law of Duke Gustave required people to always smile in order to maintain what he called beauty and dignity. Elk could not restrain himself and tried to save her, but Shinobu stopped him, warning that the villagers might exploit the situation to kill them. Even so, Elk remembered the words Melinda had tried to use earlier to warn him. Shinobu already had a plan. She stepped forward and stopped the torture, then offered a deal to free the girl. Jean became cautious when she saw Shinobu holding shuriken, which made her suspect that she might be a ninja from the Yamato Empire. The soldiers prepared for battle, but Shinobu declared that although she might not be able to defeat the entire army, she could kill at least half of them. Shinobu continued negotiating, and even offered herself in exchange for the girl's freedom. Jean accepted the offer and ordered the soldiers to capture Shinobu. From the beginning, Shinobu's plan had been to be imprisoned deliberately so that she could infiltrate the ruler's castle. As for Elk, he was assigned the task of contacting their companions if Shinobu was captured intentionally. Shinobu was taken to prison. She felt slightly annoyed because she had not been taken directly to the ruler's castle. Nevertheless, she believed that the prison itself might give her the opportunity to gather valuable information. Later, Jean entered the prison and ordered the guard who intended to torture Shinobu to step away. The guard tried to justify his actions, claiming that an enemy deserved no mercy, but he was threatened and forced to leave. At that moment, Shinobu could have escaped easily. She remarked that Jean should not underestimate a ninja, but the surprise was that Jean returned her to her place, and then thanked her for saving the girl. After that, Jean introduced herself properly, explaining that she was one of the Silver Knights, serving under the command of K. Bloomhard, and that she belonged to the Blue Army, which aimed to help the ordinary people suffering under the rule of Duke Oslo El Gustave. For that reason, she asked Shinobu to cooperate with them as an ally, because they shared a common enemy, Duke Vastidius Oslo El Gustave. Meanwhile, Elk was filled with anger, even though Emerald had thanked him and Shinobu for saving her daughter. Elk felt disgusted, knowing that the villagers had turned tourists into food, something he could not accept. Emerald apologized and explained that she had no other choice if she wanted to survive the hunger. She then told him the history of the village. At first, it had been only a small village, but ever since Duke Gustave took power, the residents had been forced to live under a strict system designed to preserve the city's cleanliness and beauty. The villagers themselves had to pay for everything through their own money. Taxes increased drastically, and at the same time they were not allowed to work freely, which caused their income to fall while food became scarce. As a result, they were forced to eat whatever they could in order to survive. Even Emerald admitted that she had grown tired of this reality, because she had lived a life filled with suffering under the rule of that cruel lord. Gustave was extremely loyal to the emperor. One could even say his loyalty had exceeded all limits. He had ordered a statue of the emperor to be made from pure gold, using the tax money paid by the villagers, even though many of them had died because of those harsh taxes. Not satisfied with that, he was planning to build 4 more golden statues to be placed in the capital's square in the 4 directions, completely ignoring the suffering of the people. It could be said that Gustave was obsessed with his loyalty to the emperor, to the point that he was willing to sacrifice the lives of ordinary people for it. Meanwhile, Gustave was furious and humiliated because the rebellion in Findolf had not yet been suppressed, as the winter had delayed his movements. Because of that, he decided to use Heaven's Fire, the weapon known as Large Soleil. At the same time, Prit heard a strange voice speaking to her, telling her that the 7 heroes were in danger, and that her power was needed to guide them. She also heard many voices crying out for help. After that, Gustave launched the fiery staff toward the city of Dortmund. At that moment, Komusa detected an emergency situation. She discovered that something was moving toward the city at incredible speed, and that its point of origin came from the direction of Gustave. Immediately, Tsukasa ordered Ringo to stop the attack. The nobles felt shock and fear when they heard the sound of Heaven's Fire coming from Oslo El Gustave. Ringo launched several rockets to intercept the attack. However, she could not stop it completely and was only able to slightly alter its course. Tsukasa assumed that the spear might be surrounded by a magical barrier, so he instructed Ringo to push it as far away from the city as possible. That weapon did not cause a direct explosion, but instead ignited an enormous fire once it struck the ground. After its path shifted slightly, the spear escaped the final rocket and headed directly toward the city, causing chaos and intense fear among the citizens. At that moment, Gustav appeared surrounded by massive flames, determined to burn the entire city into ashes as punishment for its rebellion against the emperor using large soleil. Soon, a massive fire erupted everywhere. The former nobles became confused and did not know how they could survive except by fleeing. But soon they remembered that Tsukasa had previously explained a plan to them for exactly such situations. At the same time, Prince Akatsuki appeared and calmed the citizens, asking them to move quickly toward a safe place. The former nobles also moved according to the instructions that Tsukasa had given them earlier, so that the losses could be reduced as much as possible. During this, Zest Bernard managed to rescue some of the nobles when they were in danger. He then explained his idea once again, that the future could change if people followed the seven luminaries' faith, which grants every person the freedom to choose their own future without their social status becoming an obstacle. At that moment, Ringo contacted Tsukasa to make sure he was safe. He gave her a new task that only she could carry out. The spread of the fire had already been controlled after Tsukasa widened the roads inside the city. However, Oslo El Gustav was not ready to end the matter there. He sent fiery creatures to attack the citizens and kill them inside the city. When the people managed to reach the city garden to escape the flames, Prit arrived looking slightly nervous. She told them that there was a way to stop Large Soleil, by destroying the spear that contained the fire spirits. If it was not destroyed, the anger of Laris Curiel would never calm down. Although Prit did not know the source of this information, she had received it from the mysterious voice she had heard before, the same voice that had suddenly given her understanding of what was happening. Tsukasa and his companions believed Prit's words. She had shown the courage to reveal the truth despite her fear. They also realized that the same idea had already been forming in their own minds, destroying the spear. Tsukasa and Prit discovered that many fire spirits had once surrounded the spear and protected it from any external attack. That was why the rockets had failed to destroy it earlier. But after Gustav had distributed those spirits, the spear had now become vulnerable. Another problem appeared. The spear could not be detected on the radar because of the enormous flames fixed in the ground, which prevented Ringo from locating it precisely. Everyone stood there thinking about a solution. At that moment, Aoi stepped forward and said that she would go herself with Kamusa's rocket to guide it directly toward the target. The idea sounded almost insane, but her determination was clear, and Tsukasa agreed. Aoi, her body soaked with water, launched herself atop the rocket built by Ringo and Kamusa. It was not easy. She faced many obstacles and had to guide the rocket upward and downward repeatedly. Gustav tried to stop her, but she continued maneuvering until she reached the target. Then she used the cyclone technique to protect the rocket from the flames. When the rocket struck the spear, a massive explosion occurred and destroyed it. At the same time, Gustav lost one of his hands, which had already been damaged earlier by the violent winds. Yet even that did not make him retreat. Instead, his anger only grew stronger, and he became determined to annihilate everyone. At that moment, Prit felt that the fire spirits had been freed from the restraints of Large Soleil. Tsukasa thanked her for the help she had given to everyone. He also explained that this war would have broken out even if he and his companions had never appeared, because the cruelty of the rulers had already passed all limits of reason. Now that he had become part of this conflict, he would continue watching the battlefield to protect as many people as possible. Prit admitted that she had heard the mysterious voice before, but she still did not understand everything about it. However, she had gained knowledge about magic, and after what had happened, she was able to hear the voices of the spirits. For that reason, she decided to study magic seriously so that she could help even more people. This made Tsukasa happy. Meanwhile, Shinobu felt slightly disappointed because she had not witnessed the intense events that took place in Dortmund during the Heaven's Fire attack. At the same time, however, she was relieved that all her companions were safe. Then Shinobu delivered important information. Tsukasa did not need to worry about Large Soleil being used again soon, because that weapon required an enormous number of fire spirits in order to be activated again. After that, Tsukasa praised Shinobu for meeting the Blue Forces, who were also seeking rebellion. He asked her to remain with them and gather more information because he was still uncertain whether they could truly be trusted. For that reason, they also needed to be watched carefully. On the other side, the villagers thanked ruler Akatsuki and the seven luminaries' faith which had saved them from destruction and had not abandoned them. Later, Masato arrived and explained that rebuilding the city would not be a problem because Tsukasa had already planned everything in advance. Tsukasa also mentioned that Prit had heard the guiding voice of the 7 heroes, just as it had happened before. But Tsukasa and Masato were still not certain whether that voice was a friend or an enemy, especially since the Empire might move if matters reached this stage. Meanwhile, the first armed unit equipped with modern weapons, led by Zest Bernard, had already begun preparing for battle. As for the furious Gustave, he issued orders for his forces to mobilize immediately. He also sent a message to Arc Light and Boal, demanding that they bring their armies to Dortmund without waiting for winter to end. If they refused to move, turn to dust together with those rebels. Meanwhile, the members of the Blue Forces, together with Shinobu, were planning to carry out their mission. 2 nobles, Arc Light and Bachwald, had noticed that Oslo El Gustave possessed an impulsive personality and lacked patience. Despite his great power, they considered him a failed ruler. They also did not know the true strength of their opponent, so they hoped that 3,000 soldiers would be enough to confront him. When they arrived at Rurok Castle, they were suddenly attacked by firearms used by the followers of the 7 Luminaries' faith, led by Zest Bernard. After many soldiers fell, they decided to retreat. Zest noticed that Arc Light possessed military intelligence because he chose to withdraw at the right moment. However, Zest ordered his forces to pursue the retreating soldiers toward the region of Boswald. In truth, Arc Light had planned to deceive his enemy. He had spread false information about his own death so that the enemy would underestimate him. His true goal was to lure them into his castle, where his strongest weapon awaited them, Cavalier Full Armor, a heavy suit of armor that firearms could not easily penetrate. At the same time, Gustav gathered thousands of soldiers in preparation for an attack on Findolf in Dortmund. Since firearms were not sufficient to confront those armored units, Zest decided to use bombs, following the advice of Tsukasa, who had anticipated many possible situations on the battlefield. Thanks to those explosives, confronting the Cavalier full armor units was no longer impossible. When Zest saw how accurately the plan had predicted the course of the battle, he realized just how brilliant Tsukasa's strategy truly was. But the events did not stop there. Gustave was suddenly attacked by Jean, accompanied by the Blue Forces, who openly declared their rebellion against him. Meanwhile, Arc Light and Bachwald, who had retreated into the castle exactly as Tsukasa had predicted, were shocked when one of the castle's towers was destroyed by a rocket launched by Kamusa. After that, Kamusa warned their forces to surrender immediately, because the next strike could reach the castle at any moment. Facing that situation, Arc Light chose to surrender. On the other side, the rebel Blue Forces succeeded in surrounding Gustave. Jean and Shinobu stepped forward and warned him to surrender. However, his anger only grew stronger. He refused any negotiation and declared that rebels and ordinary people did not know their true place. Thus, a fierce battle erupted. Gustave used fire magic with terrifying power. Shinobu attempted to use a flash bomb to blind him temporarily, but it was not enough and the battle continued. At a decisive moment, Jean managed to stab Gustave from behind and pressed him down using a massive lantern. Did not surrender. Instead, he used his own blood to draw a magic circle, then detonated the entire building with his magic. Fortunately, Shinobu managed to escape with Jean before the explosion. After they returned, Shinobu gave Tsukasa a report about what had happened. However, she was not certain whether Gustave had truly died because his body had not been found. Even so, the Blue Forces announced to the people that Gustave had been killed in the explosion. At the same time, Arc Light and Bachwald went to Heiserold, the mayor of Dortmund, to declare their surrender. They had realized that resistance was no longer possible after witnessing the advanced technology within the city and the precise predictions of the 7 Luminaries' faith. They stated that such power could not be opposed by human armies, and therefore they accepted submission. After that, everyone appeared elegant while wearing luxurious clothing, but the one who attracted the most attention was Akatsuki, who wore girls' clothing and looked incredibly charming. And so, after all those battles, the heroes finally allowed themselves to enjoy a small moment of luxury after gaining control over several regions. Here, Riruru continued learning magic so that she could use the mage gel and control the spirits. At the same time, the Blue Forces were still not fully trusted because their true objective remained unclear. Because of that, Tsukasa concluded that the 7 Luminaries' faith would not be able to cooperate with them easily. The reason was their leader, Conrad. Although he appeared to be a good person on the surface, he had told Tsukasa a lie that could not be ignored. He claimed that the Kaiser statue in Gustav's region had suddenly disappeared and that he did not know where it had gone, but his behavior made Tsukasa realize that he was lying. Even Shinobu had expected that possibility because the Blue Forces wanted to seize the golden statue for themselves. Tsukasa had two reasons for continuing the reconstruction of the city. The first was that they were not certain whether Gustav was truly dead. If he was still alive, he might try to recover the golden statue again. The second was that the corruption of the Blue Forces would not affect them immediately, because the people in Gustav's territory still supported those forces. For that reason, Tsukasa allowed Conrad to take the money. However, he knew that winning the hearts of the people was not as easy as seizing money by force. Because of that, he agreed to cover the reconstruction costs himself in order to gain the people's support for the Seven Luminaries' faith and gradually expose the corruption of the Blue Forces. After reaching that agreement, Dr. Kanei, the genius physician, advised both Tsukasa and Ringo to take a 5-day vacation because their health had begun to suffer from constant work and they might become vulnerable to illness. Because of Kanei's advice, even Tsukasa could not refuse. Everyone agreed to take some time to rest. The surprising thing for Ringo was that Tsukasa invited her to go out with him for a walk around the city. In truth, it felt almost like a romantic date, which made Ringo extremely nervous and unsure how to behave. However, Kamusa encouraged her and told her not to hesitate so that she could become closer to Tsukasa. In the end, Ringo asked her friends for advice about this emotional situation, but the advice she received was incredibly chaotic. For example, Dr. Kanei suggested that she use certain pills so that she could control Tsukasa when they were alone. The suggestion made Ringo blush intensely from embarrassment. Meanwhile, Aoi suggested that she challenge him to a fight and hold him tightly so he could not escape. That suggestion embarrassed Ringo even more, and she insisted that the idea made absolutely no sense. The only reasonable advice came from Shinobu, whose approach relied on a quiet and clever ninja method. The next day, Ringo met Tsukasa in the plaza as Shinobu had advised. However, Tsukasa quickly noticed her hiding place, which caused Ringo to blush again. To ease the tension, they decided to change their clothes. Ringo stood there in amazement when she saw Tsukasa wearing his new outfit. He looked incredibly impressive. Even so, the two of them still attracted attention among the people as if they were nobles. After that, Ringo remembered Shinobu's advice. She tried to grab Tsukasa's hand in a way that would cause her to fall so he would help her. But what actually happened was that Tsukasa caught her and held her, which made her feel extremely embarrassed. Ringo also felt slightly frustrated because she had not managed to hold his hand before they reached the place they were heading toward. Then came the next step, a kiss in an indirect way. At that moment, Ringo's face turned completely red, and she collapsed from the overwhelming feeling, especially since earlier she had accidentally drunk some of Ringo's drink. After she fainted, a flashback from Ringo's childhood appeared. She had been born with extraordinary intelligence inherited from her mother. Her mind was so advanced that her mother eventually began to feel exhausted by her genius, which far exceeded her expectations. Instead of understanding her, her mother often scolded her and avoided her because she seemed like a frightening genius. Later, when Ringo entered middle school, she met Tsukasa for the first time. He asked her to repair a watch. Tsukasa already knew she was a genius, because her name frequently appeared in newspapers. Ringo repaired the watch, but after that, Tsukasa began bringing her other broken items to fix every day. As time passed, Ringo started wondering, why do you keep bringing these things to me every single day? As time passed, Ringo began to feel bored with Tsukasa's repeated requests to repair various items. Eventually, she decided to refuse continuing this routine. Strangely, that decision made her feel more comfortable, as if she had finally begun doing what she truly wanted. Tsukasa did not become angry at her refusal. Instead, he seemed relieved as well. When Ringo returned home later, she realized the truth. She understood that everything Tsukasa had done was not meant to bother her, but to encourage her to stand on her own feet and start living her life independently. From that moment on, Ringo began to realize that she loved Tsukasa. After understanding this, Ringo fell asleep while leaning against Tsukasa's lap, which made her feel embarrassed once again. As the day approached its end, she felt extremely happy because she had experienced a moment that felt like a dream. Even though the date had not gone exactly the way she imagined, she felt that she wanted to relive that day again. The date ended with a photograph of them smiling together, a picture that became incredibly precious to Ringo. But suddenly, Tsukasa became serious and asked her to carry out a mission that only Ringo could accomplish. Ringo agreed immediately because she knew he must have an important reason. When she returned home, she became more serious about the task despite her lingering happiness. Meanwhile, Shinobu continued observing the situation and reported to Tsukasa that the blue forces might cooperate with the Empire, and that the location of the golden statue had been discovered. Shortly afterward, an epidemic spread throughout the city and infected many people. The problem was that disinfectant supplies had run out, so Dr. Kaine was trying to produce them again. Among the infected was Melinda, and her mother asked Akatsuki to cure her. However, he could not do so, because he was not a doctor. At that moment, a strange man appeared who disliked the beliefs of the Seven Luminaries' faith. Because the faith had banned the medicine produced by the Healers Guild, a man named Serenius attempted to treat patients using opium medicine. However, since its use was prohibited, they could not proceed. Akatsuki became slightly irritated by the provocation and declared that he would not allow his people to die. He said he would heal them with a miracle from the angel Kaine. At the perfect moment, Kaine appeared and announced that she would save many lives by creating medicine from coal. The Healers Guild mocked the idea and declared that it was impossible. They then proposed a condition. If Kaine failed to produce the medicine from coal, they would allow Serenius to sell the forbidden opium medicine. Akatsuki apologized for his tense words, while Kaine and Aoi immediately began their work, using the magic bullet created by Riruru. Kaine succeeded in reducing Melinda's pain, but she explained that the disease had not yet been fully cured. She advised Melinda's mother to encourage her daughter and strengthen her will to live. Meanwhile, Ringo was busy creating the device that Tsukasa had requested. Because of that, Riruru assisted Kaine in her place. Both Tsukasa and Ringo believed that magic functions similarly to technology on an atomic level, which meant it could potentially be used to create medicine. Kaine and Riruru began working together to develop the drug. While they worked, Aoi joked in a somewhat frightening way, threatening Riruru with dangerous substances that could be lethal, turning the task into a difficult challenge. In the end, thanks to Dr. Keeney's brilliance, she successfully produced the first synthetic antimicrobial medicine in this world. It could be described as a magic bullet, also known as sulfonamide. After distributing the medicine to the patients, several days passed, and everyone fully recovered. The true reason behind their recovery was the patient's will to live, because those who truly wished to survive were able to resist the illness. When the treatment succeeded, the Healers Guild became uneasy. They plotted to threaten Riruru into poisoning the medicine. However, Kaine had anticipated this and confronted them, stopping their plan. The scene shifted to the Imperial Palace. There, Conrad met General Nero, one of the Empire's highest military commanders. The general did not object to the rebellion of the Blue Forces because he believed Gustav had overstepped his authority and caused his own people to starve. Although Gustav had been loyal to the Emperor, the law of the Empire followed a single principle: survival of the strongest. Whoever wins decides what is right. Since the Blue Forces had achieved victory, there was no issue with their rebellion. However, the Seven Luminaries' faith could not be ignored. Therefore, the general ordered the Blue Forces to wage war against them. He also sent additional support in the form of a powerful mage named Tanganyika, whose magic surpassed even Gustav's, and who could easily use large soleil. In addition, he dispatched 10,000 soldiers to confront the Seven Luminaries' faith. And in the end, General Nero declared that there was only one person worthy of standing above all others: Emperor Lenorum. At that time, the weapon Tsukasa had requested was finally completed. It was an extremely powerful nuclear bomb, originally prepared as a bargaining chip for negotiations. From Tsukasa's perspective, negotiation from a position of weakness was impossible because the stronger side would never listen. Power, in this case, was simply a way to ensure that their words would be taken seriously. Elsewhere, Jean was inside the fortress, thinking about her fallen commander, when a man named Renak suddenly appeared. Moments later, Jean was attacked without warning. Renak ordered his soldiers not to interfere and allowed her to be beaten until she could no longer move. Afterward, he revealed that Jean's commander had actually been killed by him and that he had been a hidden enemy all along. This revelation filled Jean with shock and burning anger. The knights did not plan to kill her immediately. Instead, they wanted to enjoy torturing her first. But before that could happen, Shinobu appeared and rescued her at the perfect moment. Shinobu took Jean with her, who was beginning to become more like an ally, and together they headed toward joining the Seven Luminaries' faith. During the next confrontation, the two of them managed to defeat Renak together. Afterward, Shinobu guided Jean to a secret chamber. Inside it was the hidden location of the golden statue of the Emperor, which had been destroyed and concealed by the greedy Marquis Conrad. When Jean saw it, she felt both shock and sorrow, realizing that the blue forces whom she had trusted had betrayed their own ideals. However, Shinobu told her that she still respected the principles that once existed in the hearts of Blumard and Jean. Their true purpose should always be to help the suffering people who lived under oppression, and that goal could still be achieved together with the 7 luminaries. The two of them hid when Marquis Conrad arrived with another person. Shinobu sensed the powerful aura of the second man, even though he wore a mask. During their conversation, Conrad admitted that he intended to sell the statue after breaking it apart so merchants could buy the golden fragments. But that confession enraged the other man. He was Tanganyika. To him, Conrad had destroyed a sacred and magnificent statue. In his anger, Tanganyika immediately killed Conrad. At that moment, Shinobu realized the truth. The one standing behind Tanganyika was Oslo El Gustave himself. Immediately, Shinobu and Jian fled the scene, but Gustave began attacking them with overwhelming violence, even burning down the entire palace, Uranus Palace. Shinobu quickly sent a report to Tsukasa, and he immediately ordered her to stay as far away from the palace as possible. Meanwhile, Gustave was preparing to launch another attack on the city of the 7 heroes, using 4 large soleil staffs. His magical power had increased dramatically thanks to a plan devised by General Nuro, who had implanted something within his chest to enhance his strength. But what Gustave did not know was that a nuclear missile was already heading toward his palace. Then the explosion happened. It was an enormous and breathtaking blast. Shinobu declared that this was not Gustave's power, but the power of the 7 luminaries, coming from the distant northern city of Dortmund. This power, something that could be compared to the lightning of rulers in this world, was even capable of striking the imperial capital itself if they wished. The explosion resembled the rise of a new sun, like the announcement of a completely different world. At the same time, Masato's plans to create a new currency began to move forward. Radar devices confirmed that the target had been completely destroyed, and the operation had succeeded. Afterward, Tsukasa explained that Large Soleil had been an enormous threat, but now the 7 luminaries had proven that they possessed power equal to the Empire, giving them a solid foundation for negotiations. At that moment, Ringo finally understood Tsukasa's true intention. She realized that he had been trying to carry the entire burden alone so that his friends would not feel guilty. She told him that no matter what happened, she would never hate him, and that she would continue supporting him with all her strength. The following day, the 7 luminaries held a press conference, announcing their independence as a democratic state led by Tsukasa and the other 6 heroes. During the conference, Tsukasa explained their strength, the successful operations they had carried out, and their control over 4 territories previously belonging to the Empire: Findolf, Akla, Bootwald, and Gustav. He then explained the concept of their new nation, a country governed by the people themselves, so that tyrannical nobles would never again be able to oppress the population. In other words, a republic. Although the concept was new to the people, once they understood that it would protect them from oppression, they accepted it. And so, the new nation was officially declared, the Republic of Elm, led by the 7 luminaries. Suddenly, something happened that no one had expected. Oslo El Gustave had survived the nuclear strike. When he appeared once again, panic spread everywhere, and people began fleeing in terror. At that moment, Gustave had almost transformed into a demonic being, consumed by hatred and empowered by the mysterious object implanted in his chest. His power had become overwhelming, filled with rage and a desire to destroy everything in his path. Riruru quickly noticed that the source of this terrifying power was the crystal embedded in his chest. She declared that the only way to stop him was to destroy it. Awa stepped forward and managed to strike the crystal, weakening the flames that Gustave was unleashing. However, his sword shattered in the process. After that, Gustave attempted to attack Tsukasa once again. At the decisive moment, Tsukasa succeeded in striking the core of the crystal directly. For a brief moment, Gustave stood still in front of him. Before dying, he spoke his final words. He admitted that Tsukasa was a true leader, and that although he once believed his ideals were naive, he had come to understand them. But he also gave him a frightening warning. In the end, this world had been created to be ruled by only one person, Emperor Linorim. After saying those words, Gustave died. At the same time, another scene appeared, showing 3 beautiful girls, Shibari, Shi, and Kaguya. It was hinted that they might become future leaders if the world were to change. Later, General Nuro arrived at the ruins of Uranus Palace. He declared that the 7 luminaries had become an extremely troublesome problem, because they possessed a power that did not belong to this world. Meanwhile, Gustav's final words remained deeply engraved in Tsukasa's mind. He began thinking about them constantly, so much that he even dreamed about them. Over time, he started to feel that he was merely an ordinary politician compared to his 6 companions, who possessed extraordinary genius and exceptional abilities. A sense of humility and doubt began to grow within him. He saw himself as less intelligent than them, and wondered whether he could truly stand against the Emperor in the end. As winter arrived and snow began to fall, a quiet calm returned. People were happy about the new products spreading throughout the region. Mayonnaise, now sold in eco-friendly containers designed by Ringo. A small celebration was held to mark the recovery of Olga Village. Meanwhile, Ryu loved mayonnaise so much that he finished an entire bottle by himself. During the celebration, it became clear that Ringo and Ryu were indirectly competing to get closer to Tsukasa. Tsukasa realized that he should not surrender to despair, because he was not alone. There were many people standing behind him, supporting him, and because of that, he decided that in the next step, he would share his new ideas with the rest of the 7 luminaries. And here the story comes to an end, dear viewers. We hope you enjoyed this tale and had a great time watching. If you would like to see a second season, let us know in the comments. And before you close the video, don't forget to leave a like to support us, subscribe for more episodes, and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any new anime recaps on the channel. Share your thoughts with us in the comments. Until we meet again in another episode, goodbye.